guys are getting their total testosterone tested in 2020, and they're saying, hey, you're normal at 350. And 350, we have research that proves, in the last 10 years or 5 years, that men who have a total of 350 total testosterone nanograms per deciliter, they are at increased risk of all-cause mortality. They're at risk of heart attack and stroke. And basically, they're like a walking heart attack, but they don't know it. And they may have perfect lipids from their primary care doctor, and they're just out there walking around like this. So that's the norm now. It's the norm it's basically saying it's normal to have low testosterone and it's not a disease.
It's crazy.
So don't worry. And everybody's primary care doctors, if they're getting a total testosterone or a free testosterone, and they're saying, you're normal, so you don't need to worry about this. Your symptoms are something else, probably.
It's all in your head.
Or all in your head.
Here's an SSRI,
yeah.
right?
Which causes other serious problems.
This is screwed up. Hold up. So
Yeah.
this is a really good point that everyone needs to understand, because the lab ranges that people see, those are characterized by the population, right? So as the population gets sicker, your previous sickness becomes normalized.
Exactly.
Right? Today's show is brought to you by your friends over at BlueBlocks.com, the makers of a range of tools and devices to help support your body's circadian clock system and foster deep restorative sleep. Two processes, by the way, which are very important for optimizing hormonal health and feelings of well-being in both men and women. We know that testosterone levels are on the decline, unfortunately, as we're going to talk about today. Also in women, we know that thyroid issues run rampant. We know a lot of women have PCOS and all sorts of hormonal-related issues, infertility. Part of the infertility problem and the hormonal decline that we're seeing in both men and women is circadian rhythm disruption, poor sleep-wake cycles. So if you want to support your whole body health, but particularly your hormonal health, I really strongly suggest investing into tools and modalities to help mitigate unhealthy blue light that we're all naturally exposed to at light if we're on our screens or on our devices, on our iPhones and things like that, and invest in high quality light bulbs that optimize your body's circadian clock system. And that's where Blue Blocks comes in, because they make some of the world's best blue light filtering glasses. They have a phenomenal sleep mask called the Remedy Sleep Mask and a bunch of other great tools over on their website at BlueBlocks.com. That's BlueBlocks.com. One more time, that's BlueBlocks.com. And you can use the coupon code HIH to save on some of their amazing tools and devices to help support your body's circadian clock system and foster deep restorative sleep. Sam Madeira, thanks for coming out, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excited to talk about peptides, hormones, men's health. I think it's a really good time to talk about men's health, because we know that when we're super stressed out with all the uncertainty in the world right now, obviously stress can suppress our hormonal systems, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely does.
So, all right, as a naturopathic physician, how did you get so involved in men's health and hormones? What's the backstory?
Sure. Yeah. I was always interested in studying the HPA axis and kind of the neuroscience of stress. And I guess even beyond that, how the HPA axis can be informed or influenced by herbal medicine in my undergraduate studies at Bastyr University and even before that. So my undergrad is in herbal sciences. So that's how that kind of happened. And then once I got into naturopathic medicine, I was really excited about endocrinology, thyroid health, and adrenal health. A lot of naturopaths don't really do much about testosterone. They may give something like an herbal medicine for it. Tribulus is given out a lot. And then it's kind of watch and wait what happens and good luck, right?
Yeah.
So, do your squats and deadlifts and take Tribulus and get more sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which those things work, right? But Tribulus, I've taken Tribulus. I haven't noticed anything. It doesn't really move the needle.
Yeah.
Right?
No, not really. For most guys, I would say maybe less than 5% of guys, and maybe younger men, if someone's really healthy in their 20s. However, I am seeing guys that are 20-something-year-old and they have low testosterone and they actually need a prescription intervention. So I think a lot of mythology around testosterone is that when you hit around that 50-year-old mark, then you'll get your testosterone therapy similar to menopause, like it's male menopause. And I think the media did a disservice on coining that term, or andropause. And andropause can happen at any age. So that's probably one of the biggest myths out there that most people aren't aware of. And they may even think, well, I'll wait until I'm 45 or 40, and that would be a good time to test my testosterone. But most guys that are coming to see me are 38 or 40 or younger, even sometimes. With that said, yes, there's a lot of people that are in their 50s or right around 50-year-old, and they need testosterone therapy. So yeah, usually Tribulus is not going to really move the needle too much.
Yeah. I mean, how does Tribulus, is it more adaptogenic like those other herbs, ashwagandha and rhodiola and things like that, or?
Yeah, it is a kind of hormone adaptogen, if you will. Some people believe that it works by increasing luteinizing hormone from the brain. So if that is what it actually does, I don't think we fully know if that's what it does, but it is different constituents are, pushing the production of testosterone. But if the issue is at the level of the testes, where it's kind of like your threshold is 400, or 350 nanograms per deciliter total testosterone, which is very low, and you want to be up around 800 or 1,000, the herbs are only going to get it up about 200 points. So, and that's what I've seen clinically. And sometimes it's only about 60 points on the total testosterone level, which doesn't always translate to adequate free testosterone, which is the stuff that you're actually able to use on any given day.
I mean, I would love to drill down to the specifics, but since we're here, a 400-point swing, you'd probably feel 60-point swing in total. I mean, that could be one night of bad sleep, right?
Yeah. So for there's a large NHANES study that was done, and for every hour of lost sleep, men were losing 5.85 nanograms per deciliter total testosterone per hour. And just to give a comparison, per year, basically a normal decrease of testosterone after age 30 is 1% of your total testosterone. So if you take 1,000, 1% of 1,000 every year or so, if you had adequate testosterone, or 1,200 versus 5.85, you're getting almost 6 nanograms per hour. So if someone's only getting 5 hours sleep every night, every month, that person's losing a lot of potential testosterone that's being made in their sleep.
Right. Now, I guess the maybe it's too early to talk about the side effects, but in that situation, because I think a lot of guys are doing that, where they're experiencing low T, but they're not doing the lifestyle stuff. Is that where getting on HRT can backfire? Because like if you're predisposing your body for, say, you have sleep disorder breathing, sleep apnea, you're shortchanging sleep, you're doing all this crap, and you're like, well, I have low T, so I'm just going to hop on testosterone. I can see where more natural leaning, and I hate to even use this word, but where naturopaths saying, hey, let's just try Tribulus and all the lifestyle stuff first. I could see where there's a role for that, because if you were to say, put that person on 200 milligrams a week on a high dose,
right,
and they're not fixing that other stuff, then I could see where maybe there could be some complicating factors, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So for sleep apnea, that's a contraindication. Untreated sleep apnea, or undiagnosed and untreated sleep apnea, for testosterone therapy. So if a patient comes to me and they want testosterone therapy and they have sleep apnea, and they're like, well, I hate my CPAP machine, which most guys say, and I don't use it all the time, then they should not go on testosterone therapy, because it can make their sleep apnea worse, and that's life-threatening. So there are contraindications. If they have factor Latin 2 or factor Latin 5 genetics, or they have history of clots or pulmonary embolism, or they're on something like warfarin for preventing blood clots, that's also a contraindication, because there's a drug interaction with testosterone and warfarin. So there's a lot more nuance to just like slapping somebody with a new prescription and like writing the script and saying like, all right, just wait for that shipment from the compounding pharmacy or from your pharmacy to get the testosterone, and then come back in 3 months and we'll retest your labs, or 2 months. It's a lot more nuanced, because you got to check off a lot of boxes and say, like, hey, are you getting enough sleep? Do you have sleep apnea? Do you have liver disease? Do you have kidney disease? Do you have, are you a walking circle? Like, and do you have shortness of breath just sitting here and talking to me? Like, are you even healthy enough to get an injection of testosterone and then start exercising? Has your cardiologist even cleared you for sexual activity and, walking 10 miles a day or 2 miles or 5 minutes a day for that matter? So there's, if you take a mostly healthy person and they say they're already doing all those things, they're sleeping and eating right, and they don't have insulin resistance or diabetes, they don't have sleep apnea or liver disease or kidney disease, then they're most likely a candidate. If they're like, hey, I'm already doing all the things, I've already tried supplements, I'm willing to try more, but I really think that we should get this moving along because I don't feel like myself. And that's usually what most guys say, like, hey, I'm not recovering from that heavy lifting day like I used to. I'm not recovering from going out into the woods and hiking 10, 20 miles a day like I used to, or the big hunting trips. I can't keep up with my buddies the way I used to. So that's usually what I hear. And guys we're not as like tuned up to our bodies as women usually, like most guys anyway. We may be, once we get into health, like, hey, I ate that thing, or I didn't get as many workouts in, so I don't feel great this week, or I didn't get enough sleep. But for the most part, guys just say, I don't feel like myself. Like something feels off, and they're not going to say all the symptoms of low testosterone. Like you have to like pull that out in the interview. So that's, why it's good to work with a specialist who knows what they're talking about. It's like, hey, you don't have to have low libido. You don't have to have erectile dysfunction. Although if you do, those are red flags that you may have testosterone deficiency or true clinical hypogonadism, as well as, you may have, cardiovascular disease or vascular disease affecting erection health. But some guys think like, if I don't have those things, but I have decreased strength and endurance, decreased recovery time, feel more achy after, hiking 2 miles than I did a year ago, which makes me not want to work out as much. Those are all concerns. And there's other root causes that if you want to talk about, we can talk about what those are for low T.
Sure. No, I would love to get into all that, but I think it is important to, kind of unpack these things and talk about the side effects. And then, because testosterone, I think it has a lot of benefit. I mean, a ton of benefits. I'm not on it now. I have been on it throughout my life periodically and stuff like that. Sometimes pretty egregiously in college and everything like that. And so I guess where I was going with that, there's a lot of guys who buy testosterone just off the internet. I mean, getting testosterone now has never been easier. I mean, if you give me 5 minutes, I can buy testosterone and have it probably delivered sometime next week, but who knows what it is. And I see guys that I like worked out with in college that have been doing that. Yeah. They look like crap, man, after like 15 or 20 years of doing that. So who knows what they're buying. But where I was going with this is we hear pretty much every 6 months, like a major fitness celebrity or bodybuilder has a stroke or a heart attack or dies, like in their kitchen, taking a crap, whatever. And you mentioned factor V Leiden, and you mentioned some of these other things that are involved in clotting. Yep. So I think that's pretty reckless, because if you have a genetic susceptibility to stroking out or throwing a clot, and you're just willy-nilly cranking out testosterone to like get bro fit, you could be screwed. Yeah. Like you could die. I mean,
and I mean, right now there's some travel restrictions, but if you get on a flight, you're more apt to get a clot, right, from sitting for long periods. And that's usually what happens in those cases. Or if you have to get another type of surgery for something else, you can get a clot from a surgery. Sitting for long periods of time, a lot of people are working from home. You could just get, deep vein thrombosis from that, or a massage or something. So, throw in the testosterone, and, some bodybuilders are taking 3 different types of testosterone for optimizing their weightlifting gains, or if they're like a fitness model or something, and that has serious side effects, water retention. We talked about the clots and strokes or pulmonary embolism. So all pretty nasty stuff. And while, fitness is a great goal to have, it's like most people don't want to die that way. Yeah. I would think they would want to save their health and their bodies. And there's a right way to do it, and there's a wrong way to do it. And like you're saying, there's a lot of people doing this kind of like black market testosterone, or the kind of like the gym brown paper bag like you get from your buddy in the locker room kind of thing. And that always goes south because, most likely you're not checking levels. You're probably not checking hemoglobin and hematocrit. So those go up with testosterone therapy. And most people who are doing testosterone kind of on their own, as you're saying, and just winging it by what some other person told them to do, they're not checking these labs, and they're probably not donating blood every 2 to 3 months or having somebody monitor them. Not everybody needs to donate blood, but a lot of people do, especially if they're not doing enough cardiovascular exercise. And usually weightlifters are doing more weightlifting and kind of like going low on the cardio or not much at all. And same with sedentary people. So if someone's sedentary and they're jumping into this, either with a practitioner who doesn't know what they're doing, or just friends or family with, or they're doing it offline, that, there's some serious risk that I think maybe people don't realize, that a lot of people unfortunately die that way.
Right.
So is a concern. And, I think there's also a reason why when you're doing like this massive bolus dose of testosterone therapy with 3 to 5 different types of testosterone, that's why those people are kind of cycling on and off some of those things, because their estrogen levels get really high, and then potentially they're converting to toxic estrogens, which have other harmful effects, prostate cancer, potentially, if you're doing that for decades down the road. So whereas testosterone therapy, low dose bioidentical testosterone therapy itself doesn't cause prostate cancer, you do need to have enough testosterone to make enough toxic estrogen metabolites and dihydrotestosterone, which is a downstream, more potent testosterone form than testosterone itself. And that's with chronic inflammation, that's what causes prostate cancer. So
it's more DHT derived.
Yeah, it's DHT combined with the estrogens, and then it has to do with the receptors that they're binding to on the prostate cells, and when they bind to one receptor versus another, and how that basically changes. It begins to change basically the how hard the outside of the prostate is, and as well as some other things. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So it changes like the histology of the prostate kind of changes through that hormonal.
Yeah, I mean, it takes some time, but if you take a diabetic person with sleep apnea, or metabolic syndrome and sleep apnea, which is most people today, 20 to 30%, I think in 2008 was what they were saying. I think it's higher now probably. So those people are, cancer is a metabolic disease. So those people are predisposition to having cancer already, and throw in doing something like testosterone therapy wrong. It could be a recipe for that. I'm not saying that every person that is injecting testosterone is going to get prostate cancer. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. But if you're going to do, the bodybuilding dosages, and there was a blog, I think last year through Testosterone Nation, they're like a big
T-Nation. Yeah. Fitness bros will know what we're talking about.
Yeah. So a lot of guys who are probably in that camp probably are reading their blogs, and this kind of retired bodybuilder wrote about all the prescriptions he was injecting and taking. And I mean, it was a laundry list. Yeah. So it's a lot different than doing it the safe and right way. And you're still going to get ripped and be able to lift more doing it that way. So it's not like you're going to be kind of like a wet noodle, just hanging out there. So
it's important to talk about because I mean, not everyone listening to this is a bodybuilder or fitness model by any means, but a lot of people that listen to this are parents, or they treat individuals. And I just want it to be known, if they aren't aware of how common this is amongst teens and people in their early 20s, and to be aware of the signs, the sudden growth, increased neck circumference is a big, and then all the stretch marks that you see like in the upper armpit, pretty much a dead giveaway, because to gain that much weight quickly is usually with peptide SARMs or a combination with steroids. So just be aware. I think it's really important. I wish I would have known about all this sort of stuff back 20 years ago. But anyway, you said something really interesting when we started, and that's that now you have patients that are in their 20s who have low T. Okay, so there's a lot of things that have changed in the environment: persistent organic pollutants, flame retardants. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff, epigenetics. if you could surmise why is that? Why are so many young men with low T?
Yeah, that's I think that's the $1 billion question. I do think for men across the board, it's toxins. So just in the last 6 months, probably even I could say less, in the first 3 months of 2020 of this year, we saw the approved upon range for serum total testosterone decrease again. So I think it was 2017 that LabCorp, which is the biggest conventional blood testing company in the United States, decreased the range for total testosterone to around, I think it's 290 something to 916 roughly. I don't have it memorized, but basically almost 300 to a little over 900. In 2013, the range for LabCorp, because I was using LabCorp then to test hundreds of men for testosterone, was 348, so 350 nanograms per deciliter to 1200.
Wow.
So we've seen that went down in 4 years to 900 to 290 something. And then again, it's gone down to 170, 190 something to about 800, and in some cases 690 or 692. So we've seen it drop 300 points on the top end and even more. So guys are getting their total testosterone tested in 2020, and they're saying, hey, you're normal at 350. And 350, we have research that proves, in the last 10 years or 5 years, that men who have a total of 350 total testosterone nanograms per deciliter, they are at increased risk of all-cause mortality. They're at risk of heart attack and stroke. And basically, they're like a walking heart attack, but they don't know it. And they may have perfect lipids from their primary care doctor, and they're just out there walking around like this. So that's the norm now. It's the norm it's basically saying it's normal to have low testosterone and it's not a disease.
That's crazy.
So don't worry. And everybody's primary care doctors, if they're getting a total testosterone or a free testosterone, and then they're saying, you're normal, so you don't need to worry about this. Your symptoms are something else, probably.
It's all in your head.
Or all in your head.
Here's an SSRI,
yeah.
right?
Which causes other serious problems.
This is screwed up. Hold up. So
yeah.
This is a really good point that everyone needs to understand, because the lab ranges that people see, those are, characterized by the population, right? So as the population gets sicker, your previous sickness becomes normalized.
Exactly.
Right? And so it's like what was considered healthy 10 years ago in your lab range could be, or what was considered out of range is now normal because the population is getting sicker. So
drastically.
I don't know how it's done mathematically, maybe but LabCorp, Quest, because they're getting probably millions of samples.
Oh yeah.
They must have mathematicians that say, okay, well, here's our standard deviations, our so-called cut points, and they keep skewing those.
Yeah. Because it's a bell curve, and then you have the 1 to 2 standard deviations, and they're like, okay, that's where we're cutting this at the typically 2 standard deviations out from the mean. So that means the mean is somewhere around, 400, 375-ish. A colleague actually sent me like the decrease of mean testosterone throughout the decades, and it's dropping like per decade about 200, 250 for total testosterone. And I would say potentially more now. So, supposedly 50% of the US population now has diabetes, and diabetes causes low testosterone. So you don't have to go very far to kind of like unravel the root causes here with insulin resistance and diabetes and obesity. A lot of the stuff you talk about on your show, all of those people have low testosterone and mitochondrial dysfunction, and that's why they have chronic fatigue syndrome, and that's why they're more apt to get infections and things like that. But also they're more apt to die younger, and they think they're healthy. So they've been brainwashed that they're healthy. So now we have that kind of background lens. We're looking at a 20-something-year-old, and it's like you want to look at, like what surgeries have they had? Have they been taking a lot of opiate pain medications, which decrease testosterone, or did they take those for long periods of time, either post-surgery for post-op recovery, from the pain from that or other things. So I've seen that happen, or did they have severe mold toxicity? So ochratoxin A causes problems with the brain, and that the brain is the control center. The pituitary, anterior pituitary is where we have our control center sending luteinizing hormone FSH to the testes saying, make testosterone. And then FSH is more about male fertility, which guys in their 20s are still concerned about. So, you can test an FSH and LH and say, if that's low and testosterone's low, then there's no negative feedback working anymore. So something's blocking this negative feedback. Is it heavy metals? Is it, lead or mercury or something else, other exposures that you've talked about? Or is it mold? If somebody's not responding to herbs or they're not responding to peptides or testosterone therapy that well, and they have low testosterone and low libido and things like that, then typically we see it's mold, and that's a pretty aggressive approach because the issue with mold is it can cause potentially prostate cancer, or it can push that envelope that way more, but also can cause specifically ochratoxin A, which I'm seeing a lot of. It's in the penicillin aspergillus family. It's usually from water damaged buildings. So anywhere in the world you can have a water damaged building. You don't have to, live in the Pacific Northwest to have a damp, moldy environment. You can be in, Arizona, or LA. So with that mold toxicity, you're going to get low testosterone. You're going to get, brain fog, chronic fatigue, low libido. You could get dementia or Alzheimer's potentially down the road. And that's a huge concern because that's on the rise. So that's a whole other podcast basically. But as we can kind of see, like when you get into the root causes, like the tentacles of this go pretty far and wide. It's not just, okay, let's just slap on a prescription and check your blood levels and, see you later. And so it's a little bit more involved. Yeah.
I would love to unpack some of that, but I guess the downside for a 20-something to go on testosterone is fertility issues if you are planning on having kids. So let's say if I was 24 and I was like, you know what, I make a decision to not have kids and I don't care about going bald, I would get on testosterone, right? But you're like, well, if you want to have kids, then there is the downside because, can you get on T, then get off to reproduce, or is that a gamble?
You can, but testosterone therapy, one of the side effects of testosterone therapy I didn't mention is that it does decrease your own endogenous production. The longer you're on it, the more it's going to decrease that. So if someone's on it for, let's say, 5 years in their 20s, and then they're like, oh, I'm 30, I'm married, next year we want to have kids, and they come off, and now they're off it, and instead of their testosterone being 800, it's 400 or 600, and they notice that difference, they may say, okay, well, like, what are the other options here? So Clomid, there's another isoform of Clomid or clomiphene citrate that I like to use with people. It's a capsule, so there's no injections, and most people like that. And you just take it once a day or every other day. And clomiphene citrate, it's a serum, selective estrogen receptor modulator. So basically tells the brain, hey, we're not really getting enough estrogen here up to the brain. Let's tell the testes to make more testosterone, and then our body will convert that via aromatase to estrogens, and then we can, get more testosterone. That's if the testes are working. So
can they atrophy to a point where they just don't crank out testosterone?
They could, or there could be some damage. There can be trauma. So there can be physical trauma to the brain or the testes, or both. So if someone's had a lot of head injuries, sports growing up, that can cause low testosterone for someone in their 20s or later in life. And or if, someone's been in sports or they grew up with brothers and they've been kicked in the nuts or something a few times. And
have you had patients like that?
I've had some pretty severe cases where one guy had a jet ski accident. So he basically like smashed his testicles into like the console of the jet ski. So he had very painful accident and trauma to the testes. I've had other people I've talked to who've had, they've been kicked in the balls really hard, or they've had multiple concussions, and they're kind of like, I didn't really think much of it
at the time, but then later in life it manifests.
Yeah, they were knocked unconscious. Some of them were in the hospital, some of them were, or car accidents or football related injuries. Another patient long time ago had MRSA on their scrotum, had to have their testes removed from the scrotum and basically sewn into their side of their thigh and then reattached. And they were, I think, around, I don't remember their age. I mean, legally I can't share their age, but they were young. They weren't even 40 from what I remember. And so I think there's a lot of, other mitigating reasons that it would be an obvious diagnosis and treatment with testosterone therapy. Wow. So where you wouldn't be able to use Clomid in that case. So unfortunately,
it's crazy.
Yeah.
But the side effects of Clomid can be, for certain people, I know, like vision issues, hot spots, mood issues. So, I mean, it sounds like a panacea. You're like, oh, this pill will just tell your brain to make more, but it's not it's not like a free ride.
And it increases sex hormone binding globulin. So with enclomiphene citrate, that isoform, there's less of those side effects. But you're still going to have the potential increase of sex hormone binding globulin. And you're right. A lot of people feel like kind of wacky on it, or they just are kind of like, I have like hot flashes, and I don't have these issues ever. So they just stop taking it. And they, maybe they're 35 or 38 and they just say, okay, now let's go on testosterone therapy, because they've tried lifestyle and diet and exercise, and then they tried the enclomiphene for 3 months. And now it's like, let's just go right to the treatment there.
Right.
So there's, with any prescription, anything you're taking as a capsule or injection, there's going to be side effects, and side effects are different per every person, because you're talking about hormones and there's genetic variation there too. So with Clomid, it's usually 50-50 split. Like some people are like, oh yeah, that was great. Some people who say, or maybe there's some improvement, some improvement in libido is better than none, but it wasn't like night and day for them. And then there's other people where they just felt like it was a waste of their money and time. So,
so individual, right? I mean, we all want the silver bullet, but there's like all this variability that makes life kind of interesting. And I think it's kind of fun because it's like it's a challenge. It's a puzzle, right? I mean, but it certainly, I will say, I don't want to get too much into my story or whatever, but, did 2 cycles of steroids in college, did the post-cycle stuff because I had a great mentor, so the post-cycle, meaning the Clomid, the HCG injections, high dose, like way higher than most people, 3,500 IUs, like 3 days a week, really to kickstart everything. But then I started getting in. So I went from weightlifting, hurt my back, then got into a lot of competitive cycling. So went to that sport. I don't know if eating a lot of soy protein got into it, because I got into this kind of vegan kind of thing. And the most affordable protein powder in college I could afford was soy protein.
Right.
Anyway, my total testosterone got to 90. And I know what it feels like to feel really low. So I went from really high, super physiologic price, 1,700 total T. So way off the charts high to super low. And I was a different person. So I understand that we all want that silver bullet, because when your hormones are off, you feel like complete crap, right? So I totally resonate that people want the silver bullet, but I think having a little patience can be helpful too. And if I didn't experience that, I probably would have never gotten into functional medicine and learning this stuff, because the only solution that doctors had were like, well, just go on testosterone. And I'm like, I know. I'm like, I've already done that, dude. I know that, but why is it still low? Like, what else can we do? And this is going back to like 2004. But it's just interesting that like a lot of doctors don't think to ask these questions like you're talking about. Well, is it the mold? Is it the sleep apnea? Is it your training? Overtraining drives down your testosterone. I was clearly overtraining. And then once I discovered that in the research, I'm like, why didn't any doctors share that? What the heck is going on, dude? But anyway, I think it's interesting, but clearly hormones can change your mood. And so the person who is super shy and doesn't advance in the workplace and is wondering what's going on, you put them on a little testosterone and they're like a new person. Yeah. So it's really, I mean, I don't know. It can be pretty amazing and life-changing for people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great story. I mean, you're sharing your story is a great example of, experiencing super low testosterone, and the adrenal glands make a little bit of testosterone. And I think that's where most of the focus is with functional medicine and naturopathic medicine practitioners is adrenal thyroid. And they really, you should look at all three, adrenal thyroid and testosterone or gonads, if, ovaries for women, obviously. So we got to look at all three of those. And the adrenal glands are making 55 nanograms per deciliter on average per day. So if someone's, at around 100 total testosterone or 200 and they're in the new range, normal, 145 of that is being made by the testes approximately, and then 55 by the adrenals. So, some people don't realize that is the
split.
It's the split. And then the other thing you mentioned was overtraining. So that's huge because a lot of people are, maybe they're doing 2 days or they're going out and they're doing like a 12-mile hike. And then the next day they're not doing active recovery and they're doing another big lifting day. And they didn't even have maybe 12 hours between the end of the last workout and the next. And they don't know, they're not having anybody kind of guide them through how that flow should go. And they kind of overdo it, which, I mean, I'm prone to that too. Either it's like I'm doing nothing or I'm going 110%. And it's good to have a coach to say, hey, this is your active recovery day. And this is what active recovery is. Like, we need you to do some other things, go for a walk, stretch, like stay moving. But, you're not going to go run 5 miles or 10 miles today.
Totally.
So,
that it's interesting that you talk about that. I think it's really important. My wife and I, she's 44, and we talk about this a lot. Like people who have a history of sports generally tend to the overtraining side of things in their 20s and 30s, and they don't realize it until they're late 30s, early 40s. They're like, what was I doing, dude? Because that just set me back further. So I think it's important for the younger crowd, because I do see people when gyms were open, the younger people, they're training 5-6 hours a day. It's like, dude, if you don't have access to this gym and then they gain weight, right? When the gym's closed. So to depend upon that high volume of training to change your body composition is a slippery slope, because once life gets in the way, a kid or a job, then boom, the weight's going to pack on because you've kind of trained your metabolism. So anyway, overtraining can certainly backfire and obviously hormonally. Okay. So we talked about Clomid. What about HCG? Like if someone just said like, hey, you know what? I might have kids, I'm early 30s, 20s, maybe even 40s. I don't yet want to go on T. Where do SARMs, peptides, and maybe HCG, what does that fit into the picture?
Sure. Yeah. I would definitely recommend they do HCG with the enclomiphene if they're open to doing an injection, a subcutaneous injection, 3 times a week or roughly 3 times a week. And usually, 1,000 to 1,500 IUs, not as much as you were doing, but getting enough of that HCG pulse in there every other day with the enclomiphene every other day or every day to do a 3-month trial and then retest their levels and say, hey, did this work for you? How are you feeling? They may need something like berberine or metformin, depending on the individual. Some people just don't want to take an herb for that long because it's cost prohibitive. So, immediate release metformin could be okay. The extended release has been recalled by the FDA. So
what's up with that?
There was, I think it was NDMA was in the extended release. So they pulled it for some reason. It was like a
Molly or NDMA or
NDMA.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Okay. So
it's hepatotoxic, I believe, was the issue. So you can go on the FDA's website and just Google FDA recall metformin extended release, and you'll see all the companies and all the extended release. And I just sent an email out to all my patients saying, if you're taking metformin by me or somebody else, make sure it's not extended release, and we'll figure this out with your pharmacy. So
it's pretty bad,
because metformin was like this longevity miracle drug, right? That a lot of people were kind of touting and pushing, and this podcast isn't about that, but there are a lot of other podcasts out there you can listen to about that, folks. So check those out. But basically, it works on the body in certain ways, and mTOR and all that stuff, AMPK, and you can use berberine. It does the same thing.
Yeah.
And you don't have any side effects. And berberine actually increases like bifidobacterium in the gut. So, so yeah, long story short, I would do the enclomiphene with HCG. And I think it does have a place, especially for those younger people, you know, even younger than age 40 that are like, you know, they still have some testosterone, but not as much as they should. You know, maybe they're 400 to 550 range or 375 to 550, and throw in some herbs in there too, like high dose Korean ginseng, ashwagandha. I'm partial to MediHerb because I've been to their facility in Australia, so I know that they're high quality, and they have to meet 2 different countries' standards. Basically the FDA version of Australia, which their herbal products are governed by the drug arm of their governing.
The TGA and all that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the TGA in Australia, they have to meet their guidelines, which are very strict, which are on par with our drug arm of our FDA and the FDA's good manufacturing practices. So they have to meet both. And they have very high quality products, and they don't ever say anything like proprietary formula where it's like
a bunch of stuff really wrapped into a, I hate that.
Yeah.
You're
Or
like,
it's a paragraph, you know, and you don't know what's in there really, or how much. So it's hard to say what worked. Yeah. You know, if someone
was it the Shasandra or the Rapuncticum? You're like, dude, there's a hand of 27 things in there.
Yeah. And they say proprietary formula, and it's this just long bracketed list of herbs. And so they don't do that, and they have everything standardized. They also know the shelf life, and they have it in different, basically like climates, microclimates, and they can test the product. They can pull it off the shelf 3 years later and say, the active constituent is still this much in the product after 3 years.
Interesting.
So it's still working. So they're very, very, you know,
good quality,
stringent and high quality. And they work. You just have to know like how to dose it and when to take it, and then you're ready to go. So
that's awesome, man.
Usually that with the herbs, and then, you know, like look at the mitochondria, see if the mitochondria are tuned up or not, do an organic acids urine test, and then usually work on the diet and lifestyle. And most people should be pretty good with that. If they're not, then it's a red flag to either something was missed in the diagnostics, you have to go back and rework that, or it's time to say, okay, let's stop taking some of these things, continue some of these other things, and let's do testosterone therapy, because that's what you actually need. And usually around age, 35 to 42 is when people need to start testosterone therapy, unfortunately, or fortunately, if they get on it. So,
right.
And
just because our environment, our life load, our stress, it's at that point where if you want to be optimal, and I hear that from a lot of friends who are in their early 40s, it's like, I was doing and eating really clean diets, like getting food in the backcountry hunting. Like, dude, I started to notice like 42, 43, didn't feel the same. And at that point, it's like, there's no harm, or someone shouldn't feel shamed. Like, oh, I'm on HRT. It's like, oh, you're cheating. It's like, if your blood levels, I think, are in physiologic ranges, and I don't see any harm in that.
Yeah, I don't see any harm in it. Actually, I would say the opposite from the research. It's going to prolong their life and their quality of life. And there's even been research in Europe where they're taking men who have prostate cancer and doing testosterone therapy to improve their quality of life, and it's not adversely affecting their prostate cancer. Wow. So
that's the biggest risk.
Yeah.
Prior to that. We kind of glossed over it. I don't want to go back too much, but the metformin recall.
Yep.
I think this is interesting because a lot of conventional doctors kind of look at supplements like, quality sucks, supplements. But here you go. You got a drug that's used by everyone. It's probably made in either India or China by who knows what quality manufacturing. There's a great book out there I'll put in the show notes about the deep dive. Have you seen that book? It's got a white and blue cover. I'd have to go check it out. I can't remember the name right now, but it's just an amazing exploration into the generic drug market and how these generic drugs, their quality just is garbage, basically, because they're all exported overseas because the patent, runs out here in the US. And so the quality is just garbage. But, a lot of these supplement companies, they have some really, not every supplement company, but a lot of supplement companies, like you said, MediHerb or others, have really great quality control. And you don't see these recalls.
Right.
And they're selling millions of doses. So anyway, I'm glad you mentioned MediHerb because you worked at Pharmaca for a while, and I know MediHerb is really displayed there And I didn't realize, did Standard Process buy them or something like that?
Standard Process is their U.S. distributor.
Okay.
So because Standard Process is in the U.S. and in Wisconsin, and they've been there since the 30s. So they use them to distribute MediHerb, and they're both great quality, and Standard Process has been around
forever, man.
For a while. Yeah.
They're like one of the biggest professional lines. People don't realize, like, I think they do like 150 million in sales or something.
Oh, I had no idea. Yeah. Yeah. I know they're massive. Huge, and they're Whole Foods. I mean, they have a farm that they'd take and for like their Spanish black radish, and then you just make it right there from the fresh product from the organic farm. So there are other great companies out there too. But you got, I use a lot of different companies. Yeah. So, I use Seeking Health. I use some other companies too, Designs for Health, et cetera. So there's a lot. And I think it depends on what you're going for. And some companies are really good at one thing, and other companies are really good at another. But with herbs, herbal tablets, and herbal liquids, MediHerb is probably one of the best. And then Gaia Herbs is in the US, and they're great for their capsules and some of their liquids too. But if you look at the ratios for MediHerb, you're going to get, like a 2-to-1 or 12-to-1. And they just came out with Cat's Claw. So that's coming out, and that would be great for, it's kind of off topic, but for like any post-viral syndromes. So after SARS, we saw that there's some post-viral syndrome from that. There's reactivated mono is very, very common today. So for example, you could use it in those cases. But anyway, so the ratios are going to be a lot more potent. So you don't need to take like 15 capsules a day to get a therapeutic dose. You can take 2 or 1 twice a day. Or
are they tinctures?
Tinctures or tablets. Okay. Yeah. Or you can, dose the tincture. The tincture is usually a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-2 instead of a 1-to-5. Yeah. So technically they're not a tincture because they're a 1-to-2. They're a liquid extract, and then a tincture is like a 1-to-5. So it's a lot more dilute.
I see. It's like not quite homeopathic, but it's pretty dilute.
Yeah, it's a lot of alcohol. Yeah. So like if you drink the whole bottle, you might get drunk before you get the therapeutic benefit of a lot of these things that you see on the shelf at Whole Foods. And people are like, oh yeah, I'm taking Tribulus,
this herb or whatever, but they don't realize the standardization of that.
Yeah.
That's a really
in the potency. Like, has it been standardized, and is it potent enough, and has it been tested for all these things, and do we know that it actually is going to work? Because when you're paying out of pocket for something, and you're paying out of pocket for your doctor and the labs and all this stuff, it's like you want to get results. You don't want to say, oh, well, I tried that for 3 months, nothing happened. And you're right. A lot of the criticism on herbal medicine is around quality control and natural products. And, the third leading cause of death in the U.S. is rightly prescribed medications and procedures. So we can see where the quality control issue is actually lying. And I know they're trying, especially in the surgery wards, they're trying to improve with, having checkpoints and having more hands on deck. But, it's a major concern. And I used to work in the ER as an EMT, and my patients would come in, they're mostly elderly in northern New Hampshire, and then say, I don't want to be here. This is where my friends die, or this is where people go to die. So I think there's a huge concern for most people why they want to see a naturopathic doctor or functional medicine doctors. They're obviously ready, as you said for yourself, like, hey, there's an obvious reason why I had low testosterone. Why didn't somebody say this? Or why didn't somebody say like, hey, you can do these things. If that doesn't work, then we should go back to discussing testosterone therapy or other therapies or enclomiphene or et cetera. So sure. I think a lot of people they've hit that kind of level of dismay, and even people who are on HRT can hit a plateau, and they can say, hey, what else is there to this? Is my doctor doing everything they can to look at like all these moving parts? And do I need to look at something else and still maintain this dosage, or do I need a different dosage? There's some practitioners that are giving men creams that are basically like double a female dose, which is about 20% of the dose they should be getting of a cream of the potency. So that's why I say, don't waste your time and resources going to that practitioner that maybe they're great at other things for you, but get the specialist, get the person who knows what they're doing so that you can feel better faster.
Right.
So, and I just had a patient message me today, and they said that every week it's like their energy and their cognitive function is improving. And before they came to see me, they were doing all the right things. They were eating right, taking certain supplements. They weren't seeing a doctor, but they were working out. And if you were to see this person, and a lot of people that I talk to, they're fit, they're ripped, some of them. And I've worked with bodybuilders, and their preliminary labs were below 400 total testosterone. So I think a lot of us think, and I think this is more of a message maybe to the wives and girlfriends, like there's no way my guy could have low testosterone because he's like a fitness model, or he's a bodybuilder, or he works out all the time and he has bigger muscles than like any of his friends or whatever. Right. So the point being is, just with some of the things we talked about, with overtraining, for example, or, not getting enough sleep plus overtraining, which a lot of people are doing, you can have low T, and maybe the fix is working on that sleep and not overtraining, but maybe it's too late. It's been a decade of that.
Right. And it has to, catch up. Well, it's interesting too, or maybe the boyfriend or the spouse is secretly doing black market stuff and is on an off dose. So I have a really good friend, she started dating a new guy. This was a few years ago. We knew each other through work, and she's a functional medicine practitioner. She started dating this guy, super jacked dude, like just massive, like big old arms and all this sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden she was like, he feels like low energy. He's getting fat, like no sex drive. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, I'm thinking whatever he was on, he probably came off, right? And they're cycling this. And so I think it's important that we have this natural conversation, because that could be an easy thing to hide from someone. If you're in a casual relationship or long distance thing, or you don't live with someone, they could easily be taking something and then just get off it or whatever, and that could affect them. So it's important that we're talking about these, because it's pretty pervasive. I mean, for gym going people. But there was
absolutely
Natura Health Products, Donnie Yance. He's in Eugene, Oregon.
Yeah, he's great.
I'm sorry, it's Ashland, Oregon.
Yeah,
I take his Power Adapt and Vital Adapt. What do you think of their quality?
I think Donnie Yance is brilliant. I mean, I've seen him speak at the American Herbalist Guild conference. I think it was up here in Redmond a long time ago, like 2010, 10 years ago now. He's an amazing herbalist, great with cancer. It's kind of like his thing now, or has been for a while. I think their products are great. Okay. I would have to probably,
I'll show them to you.
Look at the bottle. Yeah, we can check it out before we're done. But overall, I think they're good. And I don't think they're one of the ones that you would be wasting your money on. But again, even for a healthy person, you're probably going to get on any given day 50 to 100, 200 increase. And I think after a while, what happens with herbs is there's kind of like this sensitization or desensitization, for that matter, where you're pushing productions through receptors and all these pathways and things we probably don't even know about right now in science and herbal medicine and all those mechanisms. And eventually the body just says, okay, we're kind of tired. We're tired of having all these pathways push for this long. And that's just a hypothesis, but
so they can down-regulate maybe.
Yeah, down regulation of receptors, or you were getting a boost and it was just enough of a boost to notice a difference. And then after 3 months or 6 months, you're kind of like, I tested my labs at 3 months and then again at 6 months, and I'm not noticing the same effect. And then I'm even seeing in my labs that there's a discrepancy. And I've seen that with myself with the herbs, where it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, I took those adaptogens at high dose for, double or 1.5 times the dose that is set on the bottle. And then I got my testosterone up, 150 points. And then I checked 3 months later and now it's down, but I'm basically doing the same thing with the herbs. So I think also there's a seasonal variation of testosterone. So in the summer we have more testosterone typically, especially if you're going outside and getting sunlight. It's kind of funny. There was like this blog and this apparently a movement of people sunning basically their
perineum or whatever.
Yeah, their perineum sunning. So, which, is, don't get sunburned down there, but, but there's some speculation around red light therapy and or sunlight, things, that we get from sunlight, basically suntanning nude, and making more testosterone. But we do know that there's this kind of seasonal variation from spring to late summer. We're making more testosterone, and then in the winter we're making less. So
it's interesting. I mean, the research that I've read is women's testosterone is kind of flipped. So we're not both super high at the same time. Women's levels peak more in the winter. So that circadian rhythm element, and I'll just say, just a personal anecdote, I found the Juve light can be pretty helpful. I mean, I personally, I don't do it as much. Like I do like 2 days a week now. I have a different routine, especially when the sun's out. I want to get outside, but in the winter, I'm very fastidious about this. And I've kind of played around with the perineum sunning thing. I didn't really notice a whole shift, but I'm like, whatever. Except in my backyard, like I have a corner where there's all these Douglas fir trees and a fence and this, so I can like meditate and whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see these different things. Like everyone's trying naturally, but we are pretty covered up. I think even people who are mindful about getting sun exposure for vitamin D, I noticed this. It was like 4th of July weekend. We went on this hike, and everyone, like back then, this was when the data was coming out about vitamin D and COVID and susceptibility. So it's like, it's out there amongst healthy people, or should be aware of it. Even JP Sears mentioned it in his satire videos, but everyone's outside and they're covered up. So I'm like, dude, you're not getting that cutaneous synthesis from, So it's interesting. We can dive into this, but peptides and SARMs. This is another thing that I had one client who got on SARMs.
Yep.
His blood work just went to hell quick, man. Like his hemoglobin, hematocrit, everything shot way up. I'm like, dude, you need to donate blood like today, man. Like it went over 50. His hematocrit, RBC, RDW, all of that went through the roof. And so that was just like,
was he on a lot of different ones, or
like just I don't even remember the exact ones. But yeah, so I've kind of had this idea, like, look, if you're gonna do anything, just get on testosterone. If you're going to go down that route, but you probably have a different perspective, like having, knowing what the SARMs do and the peptides. Maybe let's talk about what are peptides and what are some ones that people may want to consider.
Sure. Yeah. So the peptides we're talking about are not like the ones in the packet or the powder canister that you're putting in.
BCAAs.
Yeah. They're not those. So they're a chain of amino acids, and usually they're in a capsule or injectable vial from a compounding pharmacy. You don't want to get it from a research company, because there's been cases where people have gotten sepsis from injecting those. So they say for research only, and then people are buying them out of like a company in Canada or, anywhere in the US or something. And then they're injecting them, and then they get sick because there's been no sterilization. They're just a vial, with no sterilization. So compounding pharmacies have to be approved and basically certified by the FDA, and then they make different compounds of medications specific to an individual. So if you need a potency of testosterone that's different than my potency, then you're going to get your individual potency, and I'm going to get my individual potency of that testosterone. So for peptides, most of them that we'll be talking about are subcutaneous injection. Some of them you inject for a period of time. Others you inject while fasting, usually before bed or in the morning. But the ones that for body composition you want to use, like CJC 1295, that one you're going to inject while fasting, but at the same time every day. And you usually want to combine it with another peptide called Ipamorelin. And we used to use Ipamorelin and other growth hormone agonists instead, and we didn't really see great results with those. And you're spending money out of pocket, quite a bit of money, and for these peptides, and you're injecting yourself once a day, and people want to get benefits. So what we would see with those is people would get a lot of hunger, and if they didn't have their diet locked down, combine that with being on testosterone therapy, in some cases they're like eating everything in sight, and it's really hard.
If you're trying to put on size, maybe, but if you're trying to lose fat, not ideal, huh?
Yeah. So we would have guys come back and they're like, you know what, like I feel horrible. I'm eating like all the donuts at work or whatever. So not good. So I'm not a big fan of Ipamorelin. I've tried to use it with Ipamorelin with patients recently, and I really just think that CJC and the Ipamorelin together are the go-to for people that are looking for, basically better sleep, potentially better recovery, fat loss, that body composition, basically peptide formulation together. So it would be 2 injections. You don't want to combine them in the same syringe because then they'll kind of
react or something.
Yeah, no good. So
it's subcutaneous injections with an insulin syringe, but every day fasted.
Every day fasted. And then you can combine other things like either a ketogenic diet or another, paleo like diet and intermittent fasting if you want to kind of push the envelope there even more, or if you're already doing those things. So that's kind of like the go-to if that's what that person's looking for. If there's,
let's unpack that. Sorry to interrupt, but like molecularly or mechanistically, how are these things working? They're pushing human growth hormone and things like that. Is that kind of the mechanism?
Yeah. So the Ipamorelin is a selective growth hormone secretagogue, and then the CJC is telling the pituitary, make more growth hormone. So there's research where they've tested the growth hormone levels, 8 hours later, 28 days later, and they're seeing, a big surge of growth hormone from the body. So they're seeing this production. So I can't legally prescribe growth hormone, and endocrinologically, like the textbook use of growth hormone is you have a 12-year-old who's not growing, and they need growth hormone. That's when you would give them growth hormone after the right lab testing and following all that standard of care. But in this case, we're talking about, people who have obesity, all that metabolic issues, and they just can't get rid of that extra weight, usually around the middle. And they're already doing all the things, like we've talked about, all the lifestyle things. So then they would inject these things with, like you said, an insulin syringe, fasted morning or night, and it would be 2 separate injections. So usually you just pinch right around the belly button, inject it. And it's small needle. I mean, it's
doesn't even hurt.
It's like 5/16 length, 5/16 inch, and usually around 30 gauge, which is very, very small needle. Yeah. So probably feels like a mosquito bite, maybe not even. And
the first couple will probably be uncomfortable, then you get used to it.
Yeah.
But I like where you're going. I mean, I think some people listening might be like, oh my gosh, here these guys are talking about injecting stuff. I want to do this naturally. And I totally appreciate and respect that. But if you have someone who's been doing things for a long time, right, and they haven't seen progress and no one notices changes, looking for something else, because it's like a snowball. You just need a little inertia. And if you can use some sort of chemical way to create that inertia, I'm all for it, because then that person will start to identify as a lean person. Then they're going to identify as a healthy person, and it's going to create its own self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm all for that. Side effects, and then what are the costs to maybe do something like this?
There's really, besides, like hitting a hair follicle and like saying, ouch, that hurt for a second, or, maybe the injection was wrong and there's some bruising, you hit a blood vessel, capillary or something. Besides that, there's really no side effects. If you're going higher dose, you're going off the dosage regimen recommended, then you may have some like flushing or just feel like overheated a little bit for a little while, maybe an hour or so. And then that usually should dissipate. But if you're following the regimen, there's really not a lot of side effects with peptides for most people. I haven't really ever heard about any people having with these particular peptides any side effects. With, maybe like melanotan 2, like if you do it too long, you might get too tan. Your freckles that you couldn't see may pop out or something, but nothing.
When were peptides, I'm sure they've been studied for maybe 20 years, 30 years, I don't know, but it seems like this is kind of a new thing in the last 5 years, I want to say. Like, when did people start prescribing these?
I've been prescribing them on and off for about 7 years. So I think probably a little before that, And, you know, in the bodybuilding community, we're talking a lot about that today.
Yeah.
They've been used there. So
For a while.
melanotan 2, basically fitness professionals or bodybuilders who are on stage are using melanotan 2 instead of like a spray tan.
They want to get darker.
Yeah, so they're darker. But melanotan 2, which is unfortunately not available anymore because of the FDA took it off the compounding list for compounding pharmacies. But when it was available, it's really good for people who've had mold toxicity because of affecting the brain. People have had issues with, there's different, it's called Marcons. It's a infection in the sinus cavities, and it's just a really stubborn staph infection, and it can disrupt MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, from the pituitary gland and cause chronic fatigue. So mold can do that too. There are other things that can potentially do that. So melanotan 2 would be a treatment for that, but also for low libido. And melanotan 1 is for people who are like really sensitive to sunlight. So we have melanotan 1, 2 still, but 2 we don't have anymore. So if you kept doing melanotan 2, you would just get darker and darker and darker if you were already light skin, and you might get a lot of compliments on your tan. So
interesting.
Yeah.
It's so funny what we do in the West versus the East. I just, a small little story, you know, I've been to South Korea several times, and I would see, they do a lot of, like, people come in from China and other parts of Asia to get surgery there, to like bleach their skin to become whiter.
Yeah.
So like over here, we want to be tan, right? And then in another part of the world, they want to be whiter. It's like, it's so interesting. And I remember just on a sunny day, we're walking through Seoul and these cool little markets, and everyone had umbrellas out. Like, what would they have umbrella? But to hide, so that they wouldn't get tan from the sun.
Wild.
So they're trying to like stay super white. So it's so interesting how culture impacts what is socially acceptable in terms of looks and skin color and all this. So I just had to, I think it's super interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah.
So recovery, because growth hormone obviously has a lot of attributes, and we've talked about this. Steve Horvath at UCLA did a study where he looked at reversal of epigenetic age, which you can test at mydnage.com.
Yeah.
And so anyway, he prescribed metformin, he prescribed DHEA, and then the main kind of driver here was the growth hormone, you know, because to reverse the so-called immunosenescence or cellular senescence, which is an advanced biologic age.
Yeah.
And so to me, I'm like, dude, I would love to get on growth hormone, but it's so expensive. Like, and you can't get a legit doctor to prescribe it. You have to buy it off some black market bodybuilding crap website. Yeah. But this could be a poor man's way to do that.
Yeah.
But not overdo it, right? Because there's bodybuilders that have done growth hormone for years, and their foreheads are longer, like their guts are bigger, like their side effects. So this, you're just telling your own brain to make more.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's your own production versus you taking something else. So it would be on par with doing the enclomiphene versus testosterone.
Yeah.
It's not a hormone replacement. It's your own endogenous production. It's a GH secretagogue. So I think a lot of people like that option. And then, I mean, you could do it for 3 to 6 months and then see how you feel. Yep. Or you could do it for a whole year. Ipamorelin works very well in women as well. So I know we're talking a lot about men's health, but basically these peptides can be used for women too. So if you've tried every diet under the sun and you're doing all the intermittent fasting and you're exercising and you're getting enough sleep and checked your hormones and that's dialed in, maybe doing 3 to 6 months of peptide therapy and then seeing what happens with your labs. You can test before and after. You can test, IGF-1 before and after and things like that. So a lot of people, I think, who may think they have low testosterone and they don't, have growth hormone deficiency. And there's some crossover in the symptomology. So if you're having decreased recovery time for workouts, if you're not healing well after either a physical injury or even just like bumps and bruises or cuts, if your sleep is crap and you just can't get that dialed in for whatever reason, some people have chronic back pain, stuff like that. So all these things play into growth hormone, and then this could be their solution. And then with Ipamorelin, unlike Sermorelin, we're not seeing an increase in cortisol aldosterone and prolactin and acetylcholine. So with the Ipamorelin and these other GH secretagogue peptides, you're just getting everything
driven up.
The volume is going up together. This is more isolated, and you're getting this surge of growth hormone with it. And you don't, most people don't want to see their cortisol just skyrocket right after an injection. So
interesting. For best practices, would this be used at night?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's easier to most people if you're not doing intermittent fasting, you're fasted right before bed. So it's just easier to do it then. I think wherever people can kind of fit it in their routine, but you want to be fasting for at least a couple hours afterwards. And when you're seeing a surge for the first 30 minutes after that injection is the biggest surge of growth hormone. So yeah.
And because that could alter your blood sugar stuff. So if you aren't doing the fasting protocol, then you might have some blood sugar swings.
Yeah. And it could interfere with the ability for the peptide to work as well. If you're already, had a meal, right after a meal or right before a meal. So,
yeah. Do you have people cycle this? Like maybe do 12 weeks on, a month off?
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah. I think it's a good thing to have at least 2 weeks between. You don't want to kind of like oversaturate, because then you've kind of blown out the ability for the receptors in the brain and the body to respond. Some people just won't respond as well long term. So usually you do like 3 months on or 2 weeks off. And usually you're waiting for the prescriptions to come anyway for a week. So about a week off and reorder, or if you really want to kind of test the waters and see like, hey, is this a long lasting thing for me? Maybe I'll go 1 to 2 months, kind of push the envelope there. Some people it's financial. They're like, hey, I've spent like $300 extra per month for 2 months that I didn't think I was going to spend. And, I want to just save that money for a little bit and then come back to it. But I think it's one of those things that people aren't going to get the benefit if they're doing, like the American diet, the standard American diet.
You gotta be doing everything else right for this to work.
I mean, that's what I think. I mean, you may notice like, hey, I have more growth hormone, but then you're just trashing the hell out of that growth hormone right away with, jacking up insulin and stuff like that. So,
right. Super interesting. So it costs about $300 a month to do this protocol roughly.
I would have to pull the price from the compounding pharmacy, but around there it's around the 200 to 400 mark. So there were other peptides that were like $800 a month, but those are gone. And those were Testosterone was one of them. And that one was very effective. So instead of doing 2, you just do 1. And, it's an investment obviously, but it worked. And everybody, I never used it on myself or got to use it on a patient, but everybody I talked to kind of in the peptide world was like raving about
blown away.
So unfortunately it's gone too soon. So it's
because it was so effective. The FDA is like,
competition. Yeah.
Wow, man. That's super crazy. I mean, this may sound crazy for certain people listening, but there was just an article in Science Magazine about designer antibodies. So, there's this idea that like, hey, the vaccine's going to save the world, and hopefully the vaccine is safe enough that it can be utilized. I think, is it Madeira was one, the mRNA-based vaccine, that all that. But it might be more likely that immunoglobulin antibodies are going to be either given probably intravenously or a sub-Q or whatever. But now we have these peptides that are functioning similarly, right? They're basically amino acids that are affecting signaling. So you got a whole list there. Really amazing. One thing that I wanted to kind of talk about too, if you're cool going down this road, is there was estrogen being given to men who are infected with the coronavirus due to we know that there's a men are disproportionately have poor outcomes, whatever. So I think the thinking was like, well, men have more testosterone, so let's give them like anti-testosterone. What were they giving them? Estrogen pills or something? Or
I didn't ever find out. I read those articles and people shared them with me and were freaking out. And so I think if we can kind of, under the guise that the narrative that we're told by the media is always kind of like the curtain of Wizard of Oz and the truth is behind that curtain. I think that a lot of speculation from the men that I talk to and kind of my Facebook group, and it's called Live Strong. If the if the listeners want to join, it's free to join. But a lot of people in this sphere of like men's health, men's hormone optimization, are under the belief that people don't want an alpha male dominated society of the masses, of the peasants, if you will, of the everyday person, to have them all optimized on testosterone or optimized with peptides and testosterone could look really bad if, we're headed towards a lot of discourse, social discourse, which we're already seeing in the media on a regular. So that is the one theory. So under that theory, if we can do some research to show like, hey, there's better outcomes with this infection, this viral infection that we have a pandemic with, maybe more people will bite on that bait and we can actually suppress more people's testosterone. And I mean, this has been happening forever, because what happened in the 1940s is Huggins did a lot of research on castrating dogs and prostate cancer in dogs, and then castrated humans, and showed that when humans are castrated, they have lower, better outcomes with their prostate cancer. So then they didn't really go further to like the next step with aromatase. Hey, that's where you get estrogen, high estrogen. And that's the issue with prostate cancer. They just stopped there. And then this guy won like the Nobel Prize for medicine or whatever in the 60s. So after that research was done and became, approved and popular. So that's how urology has been functioning since the 40s and 60s. And I think under a similar framework for this infection, they're saying if we can suppress this evil testosterone that is causing these poor men to get sick, then maybe we can help them get better, help save them from having horrible outcomes or dying. And, the history of allopathic medicine is, bloodletting. It's this heroic medicine. It's, using biological or chemical war agents for chemotherapies and all this drastic experimentation, using antimony and lead and mercury and things like that in medicine about 200 years ago, not that long ago. So I think under their paradigm, that was a heroic, valid effort. Under our paradigms, we're scratching our heads thinking, what the hell are you thinking? Like, we need optimal testosterone to be healthy. It's, all this other stuff, this metabolic syndrome, pandemic, this insulin resistance, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, lung diseases, et cetera, chronic inflammation. And we're more tuned into that than they would be. But it's, I think it's also probably more complex than that. And, we'd probably have to talk to some like PhD researchers to say like, okay, what was actually going on there on ground zero in that study, because this doesn't make any sense to us.
Right.
We don't want to suppress our testosterone like that. But a lot of guys are thinking, why are they keep decreasing the normal ranges? And then now they come out with a study where they're giving guys estrogen. And
it's interesting. The only thing I could think about, and I didn't think about all the other kind of bigger sociologic issues that you mentioned there, which I think is interesting, is the immune system. I mean, we know that there's different receptors within the immune system. DHEA is involved in affecting T helper cell subsets. So I was kind of just thinking, well, maybe there's some acute immunologic thing going on here. But that being said, if you or I were hospitalized, we take our baseline level of testosterone good right now. We're hospitalized, we're hypoxic, we're sick with COVID. Our testosterone is going to drop like a rock.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real here. You'd have to be a super, alpha male to have a testosterone like 1200 when you're in the ICU on a ventilator.
Right.
I mean, come on here. So that to me was kind of like, that's weird. Like most people, when you're infected like that, your testosterone is going to tank anyway. Yeah. So why would they even go down the road of giving people estrogen pills?
Yeah, anyway. Exactly. Yeah. And we see that with people who have chronic gut infections and chronic infections and, reactivated mono and Lyme and, and that would be another scenario where those, going back to our earlier conversation, 20-something-year-old with chronic Lyme or something, or reactivated mono would have lower testosterone. And then if they get coronavirus, even lower testosterone. So, their thinking is obviously they're not specialists in this area. And, most endocrinologists today are specialists in diabetes. And then most all urologists are trained as surgeons. So we have to educate ourselves on who's talking to us and what their training is and their background before we can say like, okay, what the hell is actually going on? Why were they thinking like this? But you're exactly right. I mean, their testosterone would be in the tank. And then if you want me to talk about this other peptide for immune health, which is FDA approved and has been for a while. It's called Thymosin alpha 1, T alpha 1 or TA1 is the acronym. And it basically is a thymus glandular extract, if you will. And it's an injection, sub-Q, just like the other ones we talked about, but it helps stimulate the immune system and basically tune up the immune system, modulating the immune system and immune function. And we've seen it used in, cancer, autoimmune diseases, chronic infections like Lyme, post-viral, recovery from infections, either acute or reactivated mono, things like that. And they even say, this is from Tailor-Made Compounding Pharmacy, so shout out to them. But it's widely used and studied in multiple types of cancer and viral illnesses. So some people are using it for chronic fatigue syndrome, which is usually reactivated mono combined with other things, or reactivated mono and Lyme. We've seen, a lot of people have these diseases. 400,000 people are diagnosed, new diagnosis every year of Lyme disease and acute Lyme disease. And then some of them go on to have chronic Lyme. Most of them probably do.
400,000.
Yeah.
We never hear about it.
Yeah. And that's political because the people in charge at our CDC want a vaccine for Lyme and it's not working out. So they're basically saying that acute Lyme is the only real Lyme. And then this is a post Bordella bacterium syndrome.
So it's not really Lyme. It's like, kind of, sort of.
It's like, you've got something, but we treated you with 2 weeks of doxycycline, which is standard of care, and you should be recovered. So if you're not recovered, it's all in your head, or you have this post Lyme syndrome, which we don't know what to do with because we only have doxycycline for you or other antibiotics or IV antibiotics. And then people go on IV antibiotics and for a year or two and just destroy their whole health. And
this is crazy. You know what's crazy about this is because now the media is talking a lot about the long-term effects of COVID.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about chronic Lyme people, and they're calling these folks long haulers because, they got the disease, they weren't hospitalized, but in the long haul, they're going to suffer from this. And it was Lyme-related issues. It was fatigue issues. It was brain fog. It was myalgias. It was migraine aches and pains. I'm like, that sounds to me like Lyme disease. And I'm not a Lyme expert at all, but I'm like, it was interesting. This media article was saying, we have to really support these people. This is why we have to slow down the spread. And you're like, well, wait, there's people that have gotten tick bites and we don't hear about crap for treating them. Most people, they go to the conventional doctors, they get no resolution at all. We've shut down the economy for this virus. I'm not saying it's benign. Obviously it's hurting people. It's bad, et cetera. Be like, if I had Lyme, I'd be pissed right now. I'd be like, dude, there's hundreds of thousands of people that are hurting from this and we've done nothing.
Yeah.
And there's no awareness. So it's interesting to me how when politics get in, or there's this hope of a vaccine blockbuster, it's all of a sudden everyone talks about it. It's just like, it's weird.
It's weird. It is wild, and it's a machine, and it has its reasons and its players. And there's a great movie for the listeners if you want to watch it. It's called Under Our Skin.
That was about Lyme disease.
Yeah, it's a great film, and Dr. Klinghart's in it, and he's here in Woodinville, Washington, outside of Seattle, Washington. I did get the Seattle Public Library to carry the documentary, so people can get it for free. You don't even have to buy it or rent it online. Yep. But and then there's a follow-up film I haven't seen that I think is like a sequel to that. It's a little bit more hopeful, but it is horrific. I mean, what Lyme disease can do to people. For me, I've dealt with some things related to Lyme co-infections, and I had multiple tick bites growing up in New England, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. So I was exposed to, it would be like 10 ticks on both your ankles coming in from just walking around in the woods for a couple hours.
That's crazy.
So, and deer ticks, and Lyme, Connecticut is where they discovered Lyme disease, and they thought it was juvenile arthritis. And they found out that it wasn't, and they found it was from this tick bite and bacteria, and that's why they named it Lyme. And Lyme, Connecticut, I think is like around 100 miles south of where I grew up from. So that whole area is very endemic, but now they've found Lyme in all 50 states. So for me, it's been, I've definitely thought about this a lot, where here we have an actual like severe pandemic where some of these people are going to die from cancer. They never can get care because there is no standard of care, and they have to go see somebody and pay out of pocket for supplements and IV therapy and IV ozone and all these things. And then here comes along this viral pathogen. And it's kind of like, well, those people also are going to have a post-viral syndrome probably. And we've already seen anecdotal evidence of this. And we saw that with SARS too. So, this compound, you can put in IVs to Thymosin alpha 1. It's pretty affordable. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to leave your home. You can just inject it. Could be part of that treatment plan, but there's a lot of other moving parts. Lyme is a whole other long discussion, but I think that people are kind of missing, they're missing these other bigger issues that overlap with this current pandemic, metabolic syndrome and low testosterone and Lyme disease or other infections and autoimmune disease and things like that, which predispose people to, cancers and other things down the road if they aren't dealt with, and mold being in that group too. Yeah. So I think a lot of people they just don't know, and they're sitting around day drinking and smoking and, trying to exercise and try not to commit carbicide or whatever, but they're, sitting around waiting for this miracle to happen from somebody outside of themselves. And from my experience, where over the last 20 plus years, I've had to drastically hammer on my health every day, to get through medical school and to start a business and maintain that, and had, head injuries along the way, basically some bumps in the road, literally. For me, I've always realized that I am responsible for my health. So I have to take responsibility in action. And there's no, we can't just wait for a savior and be victims, sitting ducks here, okay, someone's just going to come and rescue me, and I'll just get liposuction or I'll get all these surgeries, and, it wasn't my fault. And it's not your fault if you don't know what you don't know. And there's always things we don't know, but it is our fault when it's an obvious kind of known, okay, you're doing these things, you got to ask for help, Right. And I think it's hard when you're talking about something that seems so far removed, like low testosterone, from dying at a young age from cardiovascular disease or cancer or a viral infection, what have you. But when you sit around a table with a bunch of family members and they talk to you about their grandfather who has dementia, or they talk to you about their aunt who died of cancer, or their family member died of cancer. And I'm not saying those people are at fault or it's their fault, but when there could have been something that could have been done 10, 20 years before that, in that prevention time period, the window is getting shorter and shorter because we're seeing people sicker and sicker, younger and younger. So, my message is act now. Don't wait around to do something about your health next year. Your health is not less important than traveling. Your health is not less important than other people. And I think a lot of people, especially we see this in parents, the focus is all on the family. The focus is all on making sure everybody has their college fund or, their extras, and they're all taken care of. And meanwhile, they're literally going to their job every day, or now working from home every day, working themselves to death. And they're I don't even have 10 minutes to work out. Mm-hmm. I'm well, how do you not have 10 minutes to work out? Go for a walk with your kids,
at lunch, or do this or that.
Do some push-ups, put your kid on your back, do some push-ups. You don't need a gym. And we were talking about that earlier, where people are gaining weight after doing, 5-hour stints at the gym every day. And now they're gaining weight. Mm-hmm. It's kind of well, if you needed a gym, then maybe you don't understand how dynamic fitness can be, mm-hmm. And maybe you can take that gym money and go hire a coach and say, okay, what do I do? Let's do some Zoom meetings or whatever, or build your home gym. So anyway, I digress. But the point being is, I think that, we've talked a lot about different things today. And the point is like, you got to just take an action in the right direction, whether it's, okay, I'm going to do intermittent fasting. I'm going to get on a couple peptides, or I'm going to look at my hormones, and just start somewhere. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming when you hire other people to help you, because they're kind of in charge of all the, okay, what's the to-dos and the next step and the boxes to check off. And then you can just follow the directions and go through the motions, and then you'll get the results.
Totally. Well, and I mean, I think the biggest thing you said right there, that's a great, kind of closing statement, is you have to be a participant in your health. This idea that we just passively kind of wait around, put on a face mask when you go to the grocery store, even if you eat garbage, or wash your hands, and just this passive stuff. It's like, and it's interesting because people they're expressing the idea that they're going to do anything, and we all should be doing anything and everything we can to slow the spread of this virus. Mm-hmm. But then you look at their grocery carts, you're like, well, you're not really doing everything you can, because you're the Wonder Bread, the junk, like that's not improving your body's immune response. I mean, if anything, it's reversing or negatively affecting that. So, but this idea that we just sit around like sitting ducks, wait for the vaccine and wear a face mask, that's super passive. That's not being a proactive participant and getting out there and getting your sweat on and getting in the sauna and doing these things like we're talking about. So I mean, I love mainstream medicine for what it is, but that's the downside. Is it's this very passive, laissez-faire. You take care of me. I'm whatever. Right. And like you said, I mean, if you're just not participating. And my football coach said this great in high school, whether people like football or not, like in life, you're either moving forwards or backwards. And it's very true on the football field. If you're just standing there, you're going to get run over. But in life, if you're not really being a participant and moving forward, you're not just sitting still, you're going back. And same thing with your health. You're sitting there drinking Coors Light and Marlboro cigarettes. You're not moving. You're not just sitting still, you're going in reverse.
Yeah.
So Sam, really appreciate you coming on. I know you do a lot. You have your own podcast. You share a lot on social media. That's how we connected. If folks want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're on Instagram, you can go to my Instagram handle is Dr. Sam Madeira. Last name is Madeira. You also can go to apollohealthclinic.com, and I have a lot of free downloads there. One on Andropause that is a free download, so people can optimize their health and their hormones and their lifestyle that way. Or you can just reach out to us and through the website and schedule a first appointment. I do free discovery calls for 30 minutes, so people can do that too.
That's cool.
And the podcast is on the website as well.
That's awesome. And you're practicing virtually now, pretty much.
Yeah. So I'm also in Whitefish, Montana, and Seattle, Washington. So we can do all virtual visits, all video or phone visits.
That's cool.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Are you going to go back to Whitefish like soon or?
Yeah. I'm going back. So we're at, August 7th, a week or two.
Nice.
So we'll go back for probably at least a month or so.
When does it start to get crappy weather? Like end of September, or is it snow?
September can get a little colder and rainier, but it kind of drives the people out. And then it gets like November, October.
When it starts to get cold.
Yeah. Yep.
I love Montana.
But it's beautiful in the fall. In October, you get the larch trees. I think it's the larch trees. They turn like this gold with their needles. And so, yeah, that's Montana's awesome, great.
Oh, man, it's so beautiful. Yeah. I would love to go out there. Awesome. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
A great show.
Thanks for having me.
My
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.